So my question that I keep asking that nobody really gives me a satisfactory answer for, and part of it is just, we'll have to see. But the writing is on the wall even for Hasbro. Like, toys are pretty much dead. Kids are playing video games from a very early age. If now Dungeons and Dragons as a brand and as a concept is moving away from the tabletop space, like, sure, they will nominally support it, but if it's not in big box stores, they're not pushing marketing to physical products because that's not where the money is, and they're only doing it to appease a very small sliver of the audience that for some reason still desperately wants to play 5th edition at the table. Yeah, exactly. That used to be me like 3 or 4 years ago. What company, like, is Paizo ready to step into that tabletop hole? Like, is Goodman Games ready? Like, what game company has the ability to make
Steve Jackson? Steve Jackson GURPS. It's coming.
Oh my god!
I don't know. I don't know if they're ready for that.
Like there's a scaling crisis that has to happen for whatever company decides to move into that space. And is Chaosium able to make that jump? I know that in Japan, the de facto RPG is Call of Cthulhu, sure, but even that is an extremely niche game, even though they call them table talk games in Japan, which honestly I think might be a better word than tabletop games.
Yeah,
it is table talk games. Yeah. But it's like, that's my question. In order to prevent the hobby itself from imploding, there has to be like one central pillar that everybody kind of gravitates to, because otherwise if you don't have that, the only thing that sticks around are the hardcores, and we have to have something that pulls casuals into the culture.
So I think that, first of all, in terms of the company, I don't think there is anybody who steps into that, because the size difference between WotC and everybody else is so unfathomably large. Yeah. I can't see anyone. I think, like Chaosium, Paizo, Critical Role, maybe Darrington Press kind of are like the ones in my head that could kind of maybe fulfill a similar sort of role, but I don't think any of them would ever be as big as Hasbro WotC.
I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot. That actually was the secondary topic, which is what happens if D&D just fails? And, what happens if it just none of this works? And D&D, it doesn't really go away, but it just doesn't do what it needs to do, and it doesn't grow, or it becomes something it's not, which is a video game. And then what happens to the TTRPG? Either others take up the slack, which would be like the Pathfinders and the Call of Cthulhu's and a million other games out there in the world, or does it become something else, and it becomes Dungeons and Dragons a video game, and maybe that is just something completely different? It's like there's almost two, like right now we still think of D&D as a TTRPG, but I wonder in 5 years, are we going to be thinking of D&D as its own thing? Like, oh, it's not a TTRPG, it's a pseudo video game / role-playing game / monetized.
It's an IP.
Yeah, it's an RP. I don't even know what it would be. Is it a virtual tabletop program? And the other ones, those are TTRPGs. And I have a feeling they kind of want that. I have a feeling they don't even want to be a TTRPG anymore.
Oh, for sure. 100%.
Like that latest annual report didn't mention the game. It didn't mention the game one. They talk about Dungeons and Dragons as an IP. Mm-hmm. As like an intellectual property, that they can. Where are we going to license this IP? D&D, like that's clearly where their focus is going forward, and I think that's kind of what they meant by monetizing D&D players more, right? They want to get the IP out there, and I'll be honest, I don't think that. If Dungeons and Dragons were to stop, say they were just to stop making new books for Dungeons and Dragons, I don't think that's necessarily like the worst thing in the world for the RPG community. I think it's kind of bad, but I still think that the legacy of Dungeons and Dragons would live on. I think if you said Dungeons and Dragons, people would still get that idea of it being this kind of tabletop game where everyone rolls dice. I just think that that's so in the popular consciousness of Dungeons and Dragons. I think it's really hard to step away from that.
I 100% agree. And in fact, this will be another topic that I might talk about one day, is there's a thing called a Q rating. And that is the familiarity with a brand, celebrity, company, or entertainment product that's used in the United States. It's a Q score, Q rating. It's the same thing. And what is unbelievable and which must drive WotC absolutely insane is that the Q rating for D&D has got to be way up there. We're talking like one of the highest, probably in the top 200s, because everyone has heard of Dungeons and Dragons. Like, I don't know anyone who hasn't heard of it. They might not know what it is, but that's not what it measures. It measures brand awareness. And I was watching TV late at night, and Futurama came on, and there's a 4-part Futurama episode where they are chasing after polyhedron die and playing in a digital world of Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm just like,
oh, was that movie? Did they
it was
split
the
it into
movie.
4 episodes?
Right. It was actually, it's if you watch on TV, it's a 4-part episode, but it's an actual movie. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, man, it is just so mainstream. Like, they just, like, there's the Community episode of Dungeons and Dragons. It's just, they had, Ready Player One, which had Dungeons and Dragons. Like, it's everywhere. Okay. Everyone knows about Dungeons and Dragons. Everyone's heard about it. Some of the most popular media in the entire world was a Critical Role just sold out Wembley Stadium. Insane. To watch people play Dungeons and Dragons. So everyone knows. Yet, the amount of money it makes compared to the Q rating is abysmal. It doesn't make anything compared to what it should.
Well, should it? I mean, RPGs just don't make a lot of money. Like, they just don't. Like, they're not a product that makes a lot of money. Like, Paradox bought World of Darkness, the IP brand, for like $1.5 million. Like, and that was to make video games about it.
That's hilarious.
Like, RPGs just don't make a lot of money, and I don't think that that's like the worst thing ever. I don't think that everything needs to like turn like crazy amounts of like profit. I think if there's enough money in it to sustain jobs, to sustain new products, to get new exciting stuff out there, you're still going to get people making RPGs, because guess what? Like, they're really passionate about it. Like, everybody wants to make a goddamn RPG if you're anywhere near the industry, right? Like, it's an exciting thing to do. It's an awesome hobby. I don't think it needs to make like the amount of money that WotC Hasbro evidently expect it or need for it to make in order to kind of justify it existing on their top shelf, like Magic the Gathering, right? Like, we don't need like a TCG. We don't need booster packs for Dungeons and Dragons just because it will make more cash.
Yeah, but
you're touching right on the issue with it, is that Magic the Gathering, even though it's a game, it is also a commodity, because you're constantly having to buy new to stay relevant with the latest edition's cards. But it's not Kleenex. You can't just go. You can't justify just going and buying 18 players handbooks, but you can do that. You can go buy half a pallet of Kleenex, Kleenex boxes.
Yeah.
I mean, well, the thing is that before D&D really got noticed by Hasbro, I think we were still seeing a renaissance and the old school mentality of Dungeons and Dragons. Like, when D&D 5th edition came out, it's not my favorite edition, but it's still fun in limited doses for my players. It's nice to be a superhero. It's nice to go and just destroy everything for a little while. And, it's a fun game. But then suddenly, in a weird way, its own success has almost doomed it to failure, because now suddenly they're doing so well, or they were doing so well, that they started to pay attention to them. WotC wasn't even mentioned on any of their corporate earnings reports until just a few years ago. I mean, Hasbro had WotC for all those years, and they weren't even mentioned. That's how big they were. That's how important they were. They weren't even mentioned. Now it's like the center of their earnings report. And that has really kind of destroyed the game and destroyed the brand, because now they are sacrificing the game, and I would say the soul of D&D, to make money. And that is going to be very interesting to see what happens in the next few years. And until the OGL scandal, which, yes, it sucked, but in a lot of ways I say thank God it happened, because I know a lot of people who work in the industry that I can't name names who knew what WotC was like and knew that they were basically trying to milk it for money. And everyone before a gym, people would be like, WotC's the greatest company. They love us. They love us as players. They love the community. Everything's roses. They're great. And boy, did that change overnight. And they went from, wait a second, they're not our friends. They're not just doing this for the love of the game. They just want money. And and all of a sudden,
It's like night and day.
all these
It's
roses.
night and day.
It's amazing because I would be like, "You're wrong. You're wrong." I mean, I wouldn't be going out and saying people are wrong.
A
to their
company
face.
isn't one person. I think that's the problem people have when they try to anthropomorphize a company as one person. Say this company is my friend, or this company just wants money and is not my friend. The company is never your friend, and a company usually is never just literally one person entity that just wants money. Like the creators who design these Dungeons and Dragons books, who you might have met at a convention, and I personally know some of them. They are great. They are great creators. They're great at writing. They care about the game and they want it to be good and they love the community, right? But that doesn't mean that Wizards of the Coast, the giant corporate entity, does, just because the design team for the game does, or the editing team, or any of those other people, because at the end of the day, none of those people have the real power to make decisions. It's the executives. And even those executives aren't really giant WotC Hydra with multiple heads. They are they're separate people that have different opinions, and maybe there's some people out there who do want to be friends, and maybe there are others who want to be super ruthless. And the point is, you can never predict what a company is going to do just based on knowing the people and trusting the people, unless it's like a tiny company where it's not publicly traded and like one person has the private owner has like all the power. Then you can generally trust that, like Steven is Roll for Combat. Whatever the heck Roll for Combat is gonna do, that's gonna be based on Steven. So if you can trust Steven, you can trust Roll for Combat, right? But that's not the same thing for WotC. And I think too often people conflate WotC and its employees as one thing, and say things like, well, I trusted them and now I don't now. But everything's the same and it's different because the companies are not people. So that's my hot take for today.
You're so right. And it's so difficult to maintain that in your mind, because it's so easy to anthropomorphize it, because I mean, that's what the brand is, right? the brand is designed to create this fiction that you associate certain emotions and thoughts and behaviors with, and you start to think of as if the corporation is this living, breathing person. Whenever you read its advertising products or its synopsis or its press releases, you're like, okay, here is WotC telling me a thing, but it's just some person who has written something, in this big collection, this huge hive of all these different individuals who are all interacting, and 100%. But it's really hard to keep in mind. It's really tough because I think our language doesn't do a great job of actually discussing these types of entities.
Well, I think it's as human beings, the same way that you look at a car and you see a face.
Christine.
It's we deal with humans all day, all night, our entire lives, and we use that on companies, on products, on houses, on our animals. We use emotions to define how we feel about them or what we think of them, and that happens all the time. And so I don't think it's something you could escape from if you're a human. So I try. So I personally, I mean, obviously, companies will have certain house styles and things. I cover a lot of Games Workshop, and Games Workshop are one of these entities, and they have a lot of designers, but they keep turning out the same products with the same problems because there's this house style, and they all kind of keep to that. WotC is so big and so massive and so disparate, though, that it's really hard. I always try to. So in my videos, I always try to identify Chris Cox
right? And Cynthia Williams, like these are decision makers, these are stakeholders with a lot of actual decision making power at the company, and they really are setting the course of direction. Like there's only so much the designers can do at the end of the day. Like they're there to make the actual content.
Yeah, I've had confidential conversations with people who I will not name, who may or may not have worked at Wizards of the Coast, and cannot legally tell me about their experience. And I can tell you that they have
all
said
the best stories. All the best stories.
I can tell you that they have told me in confidence that the people that work there are wonderful, and that they are trapped in an iron cage.
Yeah.
I mean, do you remember, Baron? Remember? I think Bob told us this. I don't know. That was
World Builder.
Yeah, Bob World Builder. If it's public or private, that when he went to the summit, that the suits were there, and they were like, "Oh, do you want to play D&D? We'll show you how to play." And they're like, "Nah, we're okay." Like this is literally the people who run D&D at Hasbro, and they don't want to play or learn how to play. And
they have no interest.
Yeah, no interest.
It's superfluous. It's superfluous.
Yeah.
It's like, well, don't you represent the brand? Like, I mean, I remember when I was a kid and you would have like these, not summer jobs, but like a summer jobs. And, you would sort of get indoctrinated into the brand or the corporate identity to learn about it so you can talk about it and you can represent it. And you weren't just like a cog in the wheel. And then you were like all part of the family. And that was a big thing in the 80s and the 90s. And it was a little goofy back then. And people used to make fun of it. And there's movies like Gung Ho that are totally about this like working culture thing. Like, oh yeah, it's like, yeah, we're all part of the culture of work. And it was a big thing in the 80s. But now, I don't know which is worse. Like, okay, you're all part of the family of a company, which really doesn't exist, as we saw after COVID. That totally doesn't exist. Or is it worse to not know anything about the company and the products you're shilling? And I'm like, I don't know which is worse. It's like would you rather be not Uber but some other kind of delivery driving service where your entire job is going from one business with a widget that's in a black box and delivering it to another company that receives the widget in the black box, and you have no idea what it is, and you have no cultural experience with the thing because you have no coworkers, you're completely isolated in your car, and you're just delivering this thing that may or may not be parts of like an anthrax nuclear bomb, or it could be meat to make cheeseburgers. Like, you have no idea what you're actually partaking in at a systemic level.
I'll be honest, that just sounds like making YouTube videos.
It really does, doesn't it?